As we move into this module on power and privilege, I want to give you a little background of where and how this has become so important in my own life. Oh, a good 20-odd years ago, I met a man named James Wolfing, who we started working at a training center in Connecticut for alcohol, substance abuse, and prevention and mental health issues called the Center. And we all started the first day, and we struck up a good conversation and relationship, and most of it revolved around standing in the bathroom one day and talking about both being part of 12-step recovery programs. Jim more intently than I did, but as we talked more and more, we had lots of commonalities. I had 2 stepsons, he had 2 children. We were about the same age, even though he'll tell you that I'm older than he is. We both have a similar educational process. He was a dean of Holy Cross College for several years, and I myself was, graduated from Yale University. So, we met our wives, we loved each other, we loved our families. We talked a lot about the care for our children and our families. And then we started to do some training, and of course, me being the only African-American trainer there, I got to do cultural competence courses. They just expected me to know that and expected me to have a passion for that, which did develop. And Jim was my partner in doing that. And we developed some good curriculum in the sense that much of the curriculum we were offered, we didn't feel went deep enough. It was not intimate enough. I think it just gave a lot of surface to the issues. So we thought about that, and we were thinking about writing it, but before we got to write it, we did a lot of traveling with each other. And as we were traveling, from state to state in different situations, Jim and I would present in a similar situation and be responded to differently. Much like we heard when we were talking about cultural competence this morning, there were times when I would be in a line in a grocery store line. Jim would go before me, he'd get a hi, hello, how you doing? And he'd get to tender his credit card and pay for his things. I'd come up next, no eye contact, no greeting. If I tendered my credit card, I was asked for 2 pieces of identification to prove it was my card. And that happened time and time again, and Jim wasn't saying anything, it wasn't doing anything. And I got more and more angry with that, and more frustrated with that, until finally, I blew up. I don't know if you've heard there was a book called Black Rage by Greer and Cobbs back in the 70s. I wasn't angry, folks, I had rage. Because there had been time after time after time, even before the relationship that I had with Jim, where I experienced difference, and I was a target, it felt like. I was mistreated, I felt, in many ways. I was discriminated against. So here we are traveling with what I thought was a good friend, and it finally blew up. We were in a hotel room, I can't remember where it was, and the Rodney King verdict came down. And here were black people burning down their own community. And I just started ranting and raving. Why did they burn their own community? What the hell is going on? And Jim, who identified himself as a liberal, was trying to calm me down and give me the other side of that. And I said, and I don't swear, folks, I said, you effing liberal. You don't understand. But the good thing was, in the demonstration of his willingness to be an ally, he lived with my rage. He let me just rant and rave. And then we sat down and we started to talk about what was really going on. And I helped him hear about the example after example where things were happening to me as we were traveling, things were being said to me as we were traveling, and you didn't say anything. And he helped me to hear, I didn't know. And I helped him to hear, well, the fact that you didn't know, I didn't know that you didn't know. And that's what brought on my anger and my rage with you. And again, the powerful ally that he's been in my life, we sat down and began to talk it out. We took about 2.5 years to talk about it, to think about it, continue to travel together. We started to do our own research in communities. We'd separate and we'd go about our way, and Jim began to have a clearer picture of how I was treated. He saw the things that were happening to me as I was going into stores, followed into dressing rooms, people would take I would give somebody, if I paid for something with money, a dollar bill or whatever, they wouldn't put my change in my hand, they would put it on the counter, so they wouldn't have to touch my hand. And Jim began to see that stuff, and he helped me to get in touch with the feelings related to that. And over that 2.5 years, we ended up writing a workshop that we call, and still do to this day, Racism of the Well-Intended. And well-intended was Jim's label because he was well-intended. He was from New Jersey, and he'll tell you which exit. And he also will tell you about the fact that he was raised in a family where racism was not tolerated. Racism was something that you didn't do. And yet, he appreciated, as we did the work, what his white privilege had given him. It shielded him from much of the stuff that I was being relating to and dealing with. And it was interesting because with his white privilege, he began to feel some shame or some sense of, guilt about that. And again, one of the conversations we're able to have is, don't feel guilty about it. That's, your privilege will get us the ability to do what we want to do. And even to this day, Jim is the front man. I mean, there have been more than one time when I tried to lead the way and we don't get what we want because, I'm not always listened to real well. In fact, Ralph Ellison wrote a book called Invisible Man, and that's how I felt many times. I felt invisible. I felt as I wasn't there. We'd be sitting in an organization or a corporation, Jim and I, and we're talking about racism well-intended, seeing if they would buy the training. And they would ask a question about a part of the curriculum. I would verbalize and share with them what that part of the curriculum was about, and they'd ask Jim the questions about it. Like I was invisible. And folks, it happened again and again and again. One of the questions Jim asked me, do you ever think maybe you're paranoid, Dick? And I said, no, but I'm real hypersensitive. And he could hear that. So for me, that's the foundation of what racism, the well-intended, was for us. That was the foundation of my beginning to learn about power and privilege. And I wasn't mad at him, because his privilege coupled with what I began to appreciate what my power was, because when I thought about power initially, I thought it was status, money, class, all that stuff. And the reality was I was withholding some of my most powerful pieces, care and love for other human beings. And when I was able to get into that connection, it began to get better. So over time, I'll say the Alliance, the work at Racism Well-Intended has saved my life. Because I don't know how calm I would be today. And there's been some real difficult situations. I don't know if there's a hospital here, and I mentioned I was a patient at Connecticut Valley Hospital at least 40 to 50 times. Back in the mid-'80s, we had an opportunity to go into Connecticut Valley Hospital and offer Racism the Well-Intended to every staff person in that hospital. And I feel so proud of that opportunity, and I feel proud of the ability to pass that on. And we're continuing to pass it on. And I think I'm proud of the fact that this is a piece of the curriculum of the Recovery Coach Academy. And we're going to give you a piece of what it looks like when Jim and I had done the white privilege piece, because you'll hear an interchange or some declarations from Phil and I. And please, as we do this, just listen to what we have to say. Give us an opportunity to get through all the points that we want to make. And we'll certainly open up to discussion after the fact. In fact, after we take a break after this, we're going to continue to talk about power. And we're going to continue to talk about difference. So there'll be ongoing opportunity for us to really think about this. But I want you to think about up front, when you think about privilege, what does that mean to you? When you think about privilege, what does that mean to you? Yes?
I think about somebody who has money.
Somebody who has money. Access.
More rights.
More rights.
Entitlement.
Options.
Oh yeah, options. Okay. When we're doing this course, again, folks, sometimes you don't connect the dots until you have to, or until you get more information. As a child growing up in New Haven, Connecticut, I lived in a very isolated community. The only people living in that community were African Americans and Ukrainians. So I got to know Ukrainians, but I didn't get to know much beyond that. And I remember in school and on the radio and in the media, as they identified or they talked about communities like the one that I lived in, when they talked about kids who matched who I was, because my mom and dad had 8 kids. We had 2 bedrooms full of bunk beds. So there was some real, not a whole lot of resources. But I'm locking onto, when we first started doing this piece on privilege, one of the labels that were put on kids in my community that we were underprivileged. And I think about that. So already the messages are coming in. So when you think about it, most often we talk about privilege and power, we talk in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, and class. And that's for good reason, because these are strong cases of privilege in our culture. But we also need to understand that one of the strongest aspects of privilege and power is that very often those who have it are often not aware of the extent of their privilege. Jim got that. And in getting that, it didn't increase his entitlement, it increases gratitude for the opportunity to not live that white privilege out in a way that was basically demeaning to me initially, and helping other people to get beyond that. We were introduced to Peggy McIntosh in our work. Jim was a dean at Holy Cross College, and Peggy McIntosh was at Wellesley College, so he had some awareness of who she was. And he had some awareness that she wrote an article called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, which you have in your manual. And I encourage you to read that at some point and read it through its entirety. Because she's not only talking about privilege that she wanted her white male colleagues to appreciate that they had, that she didn't have as a female faculty member in an all-female institution. Think about that. She had less privilege in an all-female, as an all-female faculty member in an all-female institution than some of her white male colleagues had. So she wrote a paper to try to give them some information, some insight on what that was like for her. So not only was she talking about privilege, she was also talking about race and gender. Very powerful article. And she speaks very eloquently around that. So what I want you to do now is turn to page 75, which is something called the White Privilege Checklist. If I remember correctly, Peggy McIntosh may have had 40 or 50 items that she spoke to in trying to educate her white male colleagues at Wellesley College. Phil and I are going to speak to a few of these. And again, please allow us to speak from our hearts, speak from our experiences, and without interrupting us, but just absorb the information and get a sense of what the experience is for you. And normally when I've done this in the past, I identify myself, and as I thought about it today, but this is also part of my own evolution, because I'm trying to understand how I'm going to pass this information on to my grandchildren. When I first started doing the work, I appreciated the fact that I was a human, HUE-MAN, because it seems like all people saw was the color of my skin. There's also, I latched into the concept of human because, gosh, folks, I've been called colored. I've been called African American. I've been called a jigaboo. I've been called the N-word. It begins to become, what am I? And I would question that and question that. So I finally decided I am who I say I am. In my own recovery process, tying back to what I most want you to appreciate and hear as you think about what place does this work have in your work as coaches of recovery. One was that through the 40 to 50 hospitalizations at Connecticut Valley Hospital, and again, I'm not judging or blaming them, not once did someone talk to me about my racial identity issues. So that stuff was still there. And maybe it was a part of what kept me going back, because it was shame-producing. It was stressful. It was something I had no control over, no charge over. So I want to be able to appreciate that piece. So as I introduce myself in this process, I'm going to call myself that human. And the real context is, as a human, being in America, my experience has been. And sometimes I'll change it up a little bit. But the reality is that I'm looking to appreciate the fact that my transformation, my transition has been from that human to feeling human today. And I'm better able to feel human today because of the allies who've helped me through. And the bottom line, when we talk about racism, well-intended, we're looking for allies in the challenge in overcoming racism. We're looking for allies in the challenge of truly embracing all who want what they want and need what they need. So with that in mind, let's share this.
Okay. So, as you can obviously see, I'm white, and I'm Anglo-Saxon, and I'm Protestant. I am a wasp. And as a matter of fact, I have direct descendants to the Mayflower, John Alden and Priscilla Mullen. My middle name is Alton. A lot of my cousins and family middle name is Alden, and that's from John Alden. So I came over as a settler, I guess, my relatives, and I'm about as white as you can get and about as privileged as you can get, except for maybe the whole money piece. I don't have as much money as a lot of the original people that came over. So my experience is obviously a lot different than Art's, and you're even talking about the 70s. And I grew up in Manchester, 2 towns over from Hartford. Mm-hmm. And because of this class, I've met people who were in the city at Hartford that were having race riots. And I just lived in Manchester, kind of insulated from that whole thing. It was a 10-minute car ride away. So I'm going to introduce myself, and I'll just jump right in this. As a white male in America, I can, if I wish to, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. And that's true. I had never even thought about it before, that I can be with white people. It's very simple for me. Most places I go are full of white people that look like me. What I've noticed recently as a result of attending 2 courses of racism of the well-intended and doing this numerous times with Art is that my son plays basketball. And I'll tell you, if you go out into a suburb town, the audience and the teams we're playing is completely different than a city team. Completely. And the audience is completely different. And so what I'm trying to do with my privilege is be aware of my surroundings and then see what I can do, be open to ways that I can improve it.
Thank you. As a human, being in America, my experience has been that I cannot, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Not if I want to avail myself of the services and the resources that are critical to supporting my family. More times than not, I'm around people who don't look like me, especially the experience at Yale. Even though there was an influx of African American students when I started at Yale, there still was that feeling of being surrounded. And there still was that feeling of wondering why I was there. So it's very difficult to be able to do that. Sure, I can isolate myself and insulate myself, but in order to be able to live in this world and take advantage of the opportunities in this world and amass the resources that are critical to the well-being of my family, I have to be in the world. And many times the world doesn't look like me or necessarily accept me in a way that I'd like to be accepted.
As a white male in America, I can go shopping alone most of the time, no, let's say all of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. Never even occurred to me. Even when I was strung out on cocaine, looking like a mess, I don't ever remember being followed or harassed. Just wouldn't occur to me. I'm going into the store to shop.
As a human being in America, my experience has been, when I go shopping alone, I expect something to happen. I expect to be followed or harassed and sometimes abused. I used to play a game. I'd walk into a store, somebody's asked me, may I help you? I said, no, just browsing. And I'd walk through and they would follow me. Sometimes they would follow me so close when I would stop dead in my tracks, they'd walk up my ankles. Jim will tell you the story. There was one time we were in a grocery store, and I was the only thing in aisle 3 in the grocery store. Help needed in aisle 3. Me and the cereal were in aisle 3. Just wanted to make sure they knew I was there. I get followed into dressing rooms. Some of the harassment takes a humorous form because I'll be in an aisle and there's somebody trying to get something on the top shelf and they'll say, and I'm willing to help. Excuse me, they'd say, you must have played basketball. Can you get what's in that top shelf for me? I play basketball, but how does that assumption come about? But clearly, there's the expectation. I have a Walmart that's right at this, actually it's this Walmart right here. And there've been more than one time, there's a cashier in there who I struggle with, because this person just, you can see them greet people, white people who come up and have a happy time. And just when I come up, the face just turns. And I reported it to the manager once, but that person hasn't changed. That person is not changed. And again, I don't know what's going on with them, but sometimes it's hard not to take it personally. Sometimes it's hard not to, sometimes it just gets tired of being treated the way that I get treated. Go for it.
As a white male in America, whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability. So I have never, well, again, that's not even a thought in my head.
As a human being in America, my experience has been whether I use cash, credit cards, or checks, my transaction is fully scrutinized. 2 pieces of identification. I tendered a new $50 bill, again at the Walmart. A new $50 bill, person looked at it, asked me for my driver's license. Took my driver's license, wrote down the serial number of the bill, and then wrote down my driver's license, just to make sure, I guess, if there was a counterfeit bill, they knew where to get me. I was thinking about this morning. Not only am I a suspect, but I'm also a target. And that gets to be wearying. There's a bank, it's cool being here. There's a Webster Bank, and again, there's a Webster Bank that I use right at the street from where I live, because I live a block away, folks. And there's a Webster Bank. I know if I walk into that bank today, ready to cash a check, if I walk in there and I don't, and there's a new teller, I know I'm gonna go through. Either gonna ask me for 2 pieces of identification to cash that check, and or they're gonna look to the manager for the manager to give them a nod that they've seen me before, and I've had some transactions before. I see it happening, but there's nothing I can do about it. My financial reliability is constantly in question. It seems like in all the financial transactions I engage in.
You know, since we've been doing this, I check with other people of color. How many picture IDs do you have?
I have 2.
I know, and so and I have one, and I don't even know what the second one would be. What you said your second one is? What is it?
When I was doing the work at CVH, they gave me a
Your old
state
badge,
ID.
Your old badge. And how old is that?
Oh.
Yeah. So I only have one. I don't even know where I'd get another one. What a pain. As a white male in America, I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them, and I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. Again, we talk about differences and we talk about lots of things. I think I tell the story when Matthew was, I was coaching my other son's team, and Matthew was 2 years old, and 2 African American kids scored the first 2 goals early on in the game, so I pulled them off the field because I didn't want it to be looked like we were just going to drub them. And so Matthew looks at me and goes, "Hey, Dad," in front of these guys, says, "How come all the brown guys are scoring?" And I'm like, what do you say to a 2-year-old kid then? And I just said, because I put them up front where they could score goals, you know.
Wow.
You know, and there's no this black, white, there's just shades of brown for young kids. It's all learned.
Let's take it to the human level, folks. As a grandfather and a father, it is both humbling and humiliating that I cannot protect my grandchildren and my boys from people who may not like them just because of what they look like. And you talk about your 2-year-old, my granddaughter, my blessed Bria Joy. She's 23 years old. Her mom's Caucasian. Her dad is African American. Elementary, kindergarten, first grade, kids were crying because they would see her come to school with her dad once or one day and her mom another day, so they started to ask her, "What are you?" They didn't know. She didn't know. Her mother's friends, and multi-ethnic relationship that her mom had, but somehow they would look at my granddaughter and call her a zebra to her face, right out loud, because she was black and white. Granddaughter, just as Jim and I were starting this work, came into the house one day, and I always worried about that moment. She came in and she said to her grandma, "Grandma, you ever wish you were white?" Folks, the tears flowed for me. My wife stepped to the fore, as she always does, the strength that she has to really bring these kids through. And she said, "Why do you ask that, Bria?" She said, "Because, Grandma, I see how black people are treated, and I worry about you." 4 years old. Maximum of 5. She'll also tell the story. Her stepdad is African American. Her mom is Caucasian. This is my young granddaughter. You know, she might have been 6 or 7, 8 maybe then at that point. And they had gone out. She says, "Yeah, Grandma, we went out to eat. And I was real hungry, so we went to this restaurant. And we went to the restaurant. And they put us way in the back there where they bring the food out. And my mom didn't like that because it was too noisy back there. And then when we were looking around, we saw that people were coming in after us, and they were getting waiting on before us. Because mind you, my granddaughter is African. You know, is who she is, multi-ethnic. Her mom is white. Her dad is a 6'8" African American male, and she has another brother who's of mixed heritage. And my granddaughter says, "Yeah, and they didn't wait on us, and there were people coming on after us, and they just kept coming in, and we didn't get waited on. So my mom got mad, and we left, and I didn't get to eat." Bless her heart. But see, those are the things that I feared when she came into the world, and to see them coming through and coming true was breaking my heart. But again, that's where this work helped me through. I can go on and on and on, but the reality was that I fear for my grandchildren in the world. We've had stories in Doing Racism and Well-Intended where other parents of color, and my wife has been in a similar situation, you know, my grandchildren are very light complected. And when they're with their grandmother, who's not much darker than I am, so she's not a real, there have been people who have approached my granddaughter and other people's children and said, "Are you okay? Are you safe with that woman?" Thank goodness that's my grandmother. Just blows them out of the water. But think about that. Because people couldn't accept the difference in what was going on there. And I can appreciate people protecting people, but gosh.
As a white male in America, I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. And I am never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group. I have never been called to give a keynote at a conference and say, "We'd like you to speak for white people." Just hasn't happened.
As a human being in America, my experience has been time and time and time again. When I've done well in a challenging situation, and it seems to surprise the hell out of some people, they'll say, "You're a credit to your race. You're one of the good ones." I've had a situation where I've talked to people on the phone, and then when I get off the phone and I meet them in person, after their mouth closes, they've said to me, "Wow, was that on you on the phone? You speak English good." Jim wants to correct him and say, "You speak English well."
As a white male in America, if a traffic cop pulls me over or if the IRS audits my taxes, I can be sure that I have not been singled out because of my race. I don't think I've ever gotten pulled over for driving while white. I've been pulled over for other things that I should have probably got pulled over for, but I don't think being white had anything to do with it.
I'm glad you raised the concept of driving while white. I have one of my sons, or stepson really, but one of my sons, works hard, able to buy himself a nice car. We had moved into our house, couldn't have been more than a couple of months, because a lot of building, we were one of the first 10 to build, so lots of building materials around, a police presence. And when he would come to our house, on more than one occasion, we'd have flashing lights outside of our window at night. It might have been midnight, 1 o'clock, he'd be rolling in, and the police were following him because he was a black kid in an expensive looking car. So I'd expect that. My father lived in New Haven, and there were towns that bordered New Haven that were notorious for stopping young people driving while black or driving while being people of color. How do you stop an 80-year-old man's car and search his car for drugs? I mean, to hear that just chills up my spine. To this day, you know, my wife, when I travel, has security if I travel with someone else. She feels good about that because I used to travel this entire state of Connecticut doing some research projects, going from town to town and home to home. And yeah, folks, I got followed a lot. I wasn't doing anything but driving. And I would drive real carefully. I would not roll through stop signs and the like. And on the several occasions where I would drop, I wasn't charged with anything. I was not charged with anything, but I was stopped. I remember I was stopped once by a police officer who was right behind me. I was on my way to a football game for a young man that I was working with just to give him that support. And that was a town that I wasn't familiar with. I was doing some work in, and there was a police officer, and I saw him behind me. He must have been behind me for about 20 minutes because I was traveling along. And all of a sudden, woo, lights went on. He wanted to ticket me for where my GPS was in the window. More times than not, I have it up here. I had it down here, and he decided to ticket me for that. Interestingly enough, I went to the game, and there was a police officer who was in that same department sitting. Oh, he said it must have been quoted day. Must have been quoted day. But again, folks, time after time, Jim will tell you a story. We drove into Vermont, and we were followed from town to town by that town's police officer because I was driving. It became very apparent. 3 towns through, we get to one town, person would peel off. 2 minutes later, there's another officer. Went through that 3 times until we got to the highway. Jim was teasing me, maybe we should stop. And I'll Jim, no, you don't go 10 and 2, straightforward. That's the reality of my existence. And then to think about my boys out there driving, to think about, my children out there in the world. Fear.
Last one. As a white male in America, I can be late to a meeting without having that lateness reflect on my race. If I walk in 5 minutes late, I've never heard anybody mumble, "You must be on white people's time."
It took me one time getting into a meeting late and hearing the murmurs in the room, "He must be on colored people's time." Folks, that's how I'm a target. That's why I feel abused at times. But again, I'm telling my truth without blame or judgment. Because I think what it's really taught me is personal responsibility. What it's really taught me is that I need you to help me through. And I hope that's the same for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Think about what you heard. At some point we would suggest that you journal your thoughts about what you heard. Anybody willing to share?
Thank you for sharing that. That was so, I love racial relations, and I think the conversation is easily one of the most important conversations we need to be having. And you asked about privilege, kind of the thoughts and definitions of privilege. And I was thinking it's like the often unseen and unnoticed advantage. And I thought your friend asking if you're paranoid is a perfect example of what that is.
Yeah. And he began to realize that.
Yeah.
And he appreciated my hypersensitivity. In fact, he began to encourage it. Yes.
Phil, you mentioned about the white privilege part and your kids at the basketball game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing, it was called in the book that I mentioned, cultural labor. And it's about doing the work and understanding other races and other cultures and really doing the work in that sense and understanding that, yes, granted we have white privilege, but how do we use that as a driving force to make change?
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned my husband, and that's one thing that we've started to do. If we know that I could get something that he can't get, let's utilize my forces to get that. And then once we do, blow people out of the water because they may not realize when I come into a room that my husband's black.
Right. Yeah.
So it's how do we change that dynamic and how do we use what we have to our advantage to help as a whole change the system? Because it's really, it's system racism,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it's all about that system racism. Until we can start breaking that down and infiltrating that, these things will continue to happen.
I agree. Much like you and your husband, Jim and I found a way to align our powers.
Mm-hmm.
And that began to produce better, greater things for both of us. Yes.
I definitely can relate as far as fearing for my children. My son is 26. He is half black. And I live in Manchester, which is known as Clanchester. I've been in Manchester since I was about 10, and I went into middle school and was totally looked at as a different way. I was always sat in the back. When there's times where I was at gym, just the little things being picked, I was the last one picked to be on the team. Just recently, probably about 2 years ago, and I've been in my home for about 19 years now in Manchester, in a nice street. I bought that home at 25. The first 2 weeks in that home, I did get a letter typed in my mailbox saying, "We don't want your kind here, and I know you bought your house on drunk money." That hurt because I struggled and I made sure that I made a life for myself to give my children a better life. Just recently, my son lives in Hartford. He was coming to my home. Like I said, nice car. He works. He has a CDL. Works for a good company. Makes good money. Late night, I see Manchester. They come out. It's not one cop car. There's supervisors. There's like 6 cars on my street. It was registered, insured in my name, but because he was going down Spruce Street is kind of known as the drug activity of that street. Coming down Spruce Street to get to my home, they followed him. The first thing they said is, "Can we search?" I said, "Absolutely not." But the cop is still with his headlight looking into the car, and I said, "You cannot search." They brought in the dog. Dog sniffed, nothing. Then they finally had my son had a little sandwich bag, which he had, I think he said Sour Patch Kids at that time in there. Cop smelled it, threw it up on top. It was just a big commotion, so I kind of understand it. That feared me because it's like, I've been there 19 years. And for him to be pulled over because driving while black, and with the hate mail that I got for purchasing my home, it's difficult. And I do fear for him because bringing the dogs out and just having their hands on their gun just based on a young black man that makes a life for himself, and I'm trying to make a life for him to have a good home in Manchester. I have to struggle with that every day.
Thank you. We're going to take a couple more comments, folks, and we need to take a break and then come back and do some more work. So we're going to take this to lunch, but we'll do a break in between. Yes, please.
Hi, thanks for giving it so much energy, because it takes a lot of energy. It's exhausting.
You're right.
It's exhausting. I had an experience 22 years ago when we traveled to Disney with my 2 older kids. And my daughter, I call her both my kids because my daughter had a black friend. And so they were thick as thieves. They spent all their time together. So we went to Disney together. And when we arrived, and they were older, they were 18. So when we arrived, now I've been to Disney, I don't know how many times, never had this experience. The first thing is that we are not waited on in the check-in line. We're not waited on, we're waiting, and we're waiting, and we're waiting. The next thing that happens is that the luggage doesn't arrive. And that doesn't happen with Disney. And they have a rule. So then 2 pieces of luggage arrive, mine and my daughter's.
No.
It took till the next day for the 3rd piece of luggage. I get all upset about it. And then I flew a gasket. And she wouldn't, the young woman wouldn't, because it was too exhausting for her. She says, "I fight this all the time. This is my life. I've accepted it." And I couldn't, so I wrote letters and everything. I got a letter of apology, and I got an invitation to come back, and I said, "No, I'm done, thank you very much." And so we haven't been to Disney, and we're fine with that. So, and there's been other incidences, because this young woman has been, part of my family's life for 22, more than 22 years, a long time.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
thanks for giving it the energy that it needs. 'Cause
I think just having been born and living in our culture, I get it on both sides. I've gotten people asking me, "You got white people's eyes, what are you made of?" So being multiracial, I'm not black enough, not white enough. So when you brought this up, I felt a lot of feelings. One, because I tried to ignore it. So I let people make the determination that they want to make. I stop asking the question, what are you mixed with? But then I also find that when you don't meet anyone's stereotypes, I've had people to be angry. I got a PhD, I drive nice cars, I have nice houses, I don't have any kids. Oh, you can't have children? So you were in the military, so the military must have paid for it for you. And quite often when I'm working somewhere where unfortunately I'm considered the token, I'm the only one that kind of looks like anybody, right? And so then it just seems unfortunate, just having lived my 40 plus years, not only is it draining, it is feeling like I'm never good enough for anybody, simply because of who you are. And when you think as if you can emulate because of A, B, C, and D, people discount it for whatever particular reason. And when you said draining, I don't even think that's a third of it. Because you interact with people every day who either wants to discount you, or some you do get that want to emulate it, but definitely kids who are multiracial, I think have it even harder than most. Because nobody wants to talk about how do you relate and identify to everything. How do you embrace the whole you instead of discounting what you are or not? So I definitely appreciate it, and I feel like feelings came up doing the dialogue to say, but I'm both. I want to acknowledge both. But being in a culture that we're in quite often, categorizing what we are, what we're not, or discounting what we are is often a struggle. I know everyone encounters, some encounter even more.
Exactly. Well stated. And you raised in your verbalization that whole concept of shame as a part of who I am. I'm not good enough. I'm graduating from Yale University, and I'm ashamed of receiving that degree because I didn't believe I deserved it. I did the work. No one did it for me, but there's that piece of me, having been bombarded about affirmative action and whether you fit here, all those kinds of things. But thank you, folks. Especially thank you for creating a culture where it felt comfortable enough to share some very intimate information. Thank you. Let's take a break. 15 minutes max. Let's try to get back as soon as we can because we have one more piece to do.
11:20.
11:20.